Okay, hello everybody. Thank you all for joining and for staying on. I will try to share the right screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, that should be the right screen. Right, I will give you a quick overview of the concepts of a mineral system reference collection as a collection of rocks and associated data, its purpose and uses. And we'll talk about a single specific example of a practical application of this concept to investigate geochemical and mineralogical signatures of the Ernest mineral system. So for that specific case study, I will briefly summarize overall geochemical findings, and Courtney will take you through more detailed discussion of mineralogy of alteration. So first of all, about the overall purpose. Why we think that we need a systematic collection of rock samples and data characterizing key known mineral systems. Even though we are focusing on known systems, it is explicitly for the purpose of developing more effective ways to understand sparse information about unknown systems. So it is specifically to help greenfield exploration at the stage immediately after the first samples are obtained. And to make the attractive concept of drilling for mineral systems undercover more real, more practical, and more effective in real life. So let's assume our first exploration results in a greenfield campaign came back with no spectacular intercepts screaming major discovery. So then a series of questions need to be answered. Is this a mineral system? If yes, which mineral system and which part of a mineral system, and should the company continue or stop, and where to go next? And it certainly would be very useful to recognize early on that in this particular case, the area of observation is literally hundreds of meters away from something really major, and this is the example from Ernest. And these decisions would be strongly helped by systematic baseline information on known mineral systems for comparison. And not just information, but also physical samples, because some key information which is required to make intelligent decisions about targeting and vectoring are likely not yet to be available. So with this in mind, we're steadily acquiring representative samples and geological information to characterize key mineral systems at different scales. Initially across the Mount Isa province, but with plans to expand to the east, which we have already started. We're doing lots of internal work, haloga, XRF scanning, geochemistry, mineralogy, geochronology, and fund and otherwise support research by external parties, providing access to our samples and associated data. And the idea is not just to create a warehouse full of rocks, however useful it might be, and not just to create a systematic compilation of existing geological information, although it is useful, but to drive and support further research. So we started in earnest in late 2018, following our initial plan to target key mineral systems. The plans were mostly fulfilled, with a few exceptions, but you should understand that we do rely on industry's willing collaboration, sharing their samples for greater good. We have done a fair bit of more sample acquisition last year, and more discussions on the way with several other companies. And we do welcome cold calls. So if somebody is willing to share representative samples from a key deposit or prospect, we are quite happy to hear from you. Recent data acquisition over the past 18 months was specifically focused on facilitating current collaborative ongoing research projects, distal footprints of mineral systems from codes, and you're going to hear from Sean in the next presentation, and characterizing Cloncari mineral systems, the work which was discussed by Jim a couple of talks ago. And this extensive support for ongoing collaborative research is in direct recognition that key information to improve vectoring towards major deposits is likely not yet to be available. So some more work needs to be done. So now let's go to a specific example, focusing on internal GSQ work. Our collaborators have discussed their work and will discuss in the next presentation. So let's go to the Ernest Rip deposits and Ernest Rip mineral system, typical ICG camp in the instant succession. And the question mark here is indicating that while it is a type example, it is not really typical either in scale mineralization or in G-chemical signatures compared to elsewhere in the region. So we focused our work on the area roughly 6 by 4 kilometers. When the work started back in mid-2018, we had some samples. We had some samples from the Ernest Rip deposit and some from distal areas. This was greatly expanded in 2019, manifold, with great assistance from the Ernest Rip mines and Glencore Copper exploration groups, which we greatly appreciate. So now we have a very good spatial coverage from ore, from shallow ore to deeper parts of the ore body and into distal parts of the mineral system, and probably going into regional background. So we have multiple drill cores, complete drill cores in our permanent storage, all high-locked, shown in orange. We did extensive infill sampling of additional 9 drill cores, blue circles on the map. Did extensive sampling and selected samples supporting further research by codes in CSRO. And on our part, we did multi-element G-chemistry on more than 200 samples, using multiple digestion, multiple methods, capturing information for up to 67 elements, including pretty much the entire range of the critical minerals. So into very quick summary results from the G-chemistry. Firstly, the overall G-chemical signature mineralization. The Ernest Rip deposit is characterized by very distinct multi-element G-chemical signature. It's quite recognizable by a combination of hot magmatic hydrothermal elements. And the signature is often considered typical for ICG deposits in general, and for copper gold deposits in the Courteney district in particular. But most other ICG deposits in the district are substantially different. So the existing new G-chemistry for acid digest G-chemistry allows easy discrimination in multi-element G-chemistry between sodic and potassic alteration, which is very important in this region. And this was work done by Jacques Batumike, who joined us in February. Putting together G-chemical signatures of alteration in multi-element G-chemistry and interpreted alteration types, it is quite clear that mineralization is strongly associated with potassic alteration, as has been known for Ernest Rip for a long time. Other alteration types are much less likely to be seriously mineralized. For comparison, median copper grade in analyzed potassic alteration samples is 0.2% copper, compared to more like 70 ppm in background rocks and other alteration zones. And now another view to try and summarize G-chemical alteration signatures from ore to distal. It is a busy slide, but it does attempt to illustrate a few interesting points. So firstly, the main broad conclusion is that the main ore body has a consistent overall multi-element G-chemical signature from shallow to deep parts, and overwhelmingly characterized by potassic alteration. Potassic alteration, which is so common in the main ore body, can also be seen up to 1 kilometer away, but often with no typical multi-metal signature. And interestingly and usefully for vectoring purposes, occasional distal samples up to 2 kilometers away have very much multi-element ore-like signatures, but not necessarily associated with potassic alteration. So this is all interesting in a summary form. Of course, in detail, it's much more complicated. For example, yes, we can distinguish sodic alteration from background and from potassic, but there is increasing evidence that there is more than one phase of sodic alteration, and geochemically they can look absolutely identical. And to decipher this complexity requires much more detailed mineralogical information at a much finer stage. And so for that, I will pass over to Courteney. So I will stop sharing. Over to you, Courteney.
Thank you, Vlad. And I'll just share my screen. Hoping everybody can see this. So following on from what Vlad was saying, the focus of what I'm going to be talking about is predominantly the work that's been coming out of the high logger interpretation from the complete drill holes and the sampling that we've done. But I just want to bring the talk back to our initial questions that we had when we sort of started looking at this area. And the first one was, how far away can you see the signature of Ernest Henry? And this came out of some of the work, as you'll hear a bit later from codes, from sort of porphyry systems where you can start to see with more detailed trace element geochemistry the signatures of up to 10 kilometres, but it's not sort of the work has been done on IOCG deposits. So as you can see, this area here is predominantly 4 by 6 kilometres. So I figured looking at this spread of data, it should be a good start. Another question was, how do you recognise subtle signatures in the distal environment? And one of the things that we sort of struggled with was how many samples do you need? What spacing do you need between samples? And how do you know that you've got good coverage? I think we're getting there, but I have to say, I feel like you could do this sort of work forever. And just to touch very briefly on this, there's a lot of previous really good work done on the Ernest Henry area, some from Geordie Mark in the early 2000s and some from Brad Cave from Adelaide Uni recently. But just there's early regional alteration, there's some pre-ore alteration, and then there's also ore alteration. And to understand how this looks in high logger data, it was really important for us to get our head around the local geology. So within both the Ernest Henry area and the prospect to the north, predominantly we're in the Fort Constantine volcanics. Now within this, it's mostly felsic to intermediate volcanics, which is in the brown. And as you go up towards the northwest in the green, you go into more mafic rocks. And then you also have the Ernest Henry diorite, which is in the pink on the image. So it was really important for us to understand exactly how the lithological variations were within the different holes and then also between the holes. So this is an image. This is looking along the northwest trend. We do have some drill holes that went, the northeast trend, sorry. We did have some drill holes that went towards the northwest, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on this typical Ernest Henry trend that you can see in bedrock geochemistry. And we're going to be focusing on the next few images, and this is a 3D image as well, of the high logger interpretation. So I'm not going to bamboozle you with really fancy slides from high logger. I'm just going to bring up some summary screens, and they're going to be directed from A to over here to Ernest Henry. So we're going to be going from about 4 kilometres towards ore. So this slide that we're looking at now is focusing on the Highdose mineralogy, and you're looking from distal to the left of your screen, which is from the FC4S prospect going towards Ernest Henry. And I've highlighted the best grades of ore in the yellow box for you in the last drill hole. And what you can see here is there's a lot of greens happening, and that is looking at the chlorite composition. And as you go from distal, proximal through to ore, you have a massive decrease in chlorite, but also the composition of the chlorite is changing to become more iron rich as you get towards ore. There's a decrease in the amphibole group, which is predominantly hornblende, and having a better understanding of the lithology helps us control and understanding, well, actually, it looks like it's dropping out towards ore, but actually the lithology is just changing. There's an increase in carbonate towards the ore body. In this slide, it's not too obvious because predominantly the holes in the middle were only subsampled, but as you can see, it's going towards the ore body and it's also surrounding ore in the last drill hole. And with SWIR data, well, it's really powerful. In these sorts of systems, you find that you get a lot of aspectral response, and this is showing things that the high logger can't pick up. So it's predominantly dark minerals or sulfides. So most of that is probably magnetite or sulfides. Now this is the really juicy stuff. This is looking at the thermal infrared going from distal to ore. And you can see that the holes are predominantly made up with a reddish colours and with orange. And what's that showing is to the left of your screen in the distal area, you're looking at the early albite alteration, and you can see that some of it's been overprinted by biotite. You can also see that as you're trending in the proximal areas and specifically in the ore section, you can see that K feldspar is overprinting albite and that is dropping out. And also the K feldspar is different. So one thing that we found by this sort of work as you sort of dug a bit deeper is that predominantly it's microcline in the distal areas, but then you have a compositional change. You also have autoclaves coming in as well, and that's in the darker orange colour. So that was able to help us sort of set the scene and provide a really early, sort of like a general overview. But it's no fun unless you're looking at actual pictures of rocks. So some of the really interesting things that we've been finding as we've been digging deeper into the spectral interpretation work is that there's actually a lot of variation between particular minerals. And when you look at the understanding of the paragenesis, it's not as simple as one phase of a particular mineral. So to expand on this, this is a picture from MMA 002. This is the furthest drill hole in the area to the northeast. And as you can see, this is looking at some albite. This is the predominantly early albite alteration. And also, this is matching up with some of the geochemical interpretations that Jaap and Vlad have put together. Sample has been flagged as sodic alteration. But unfortunately, as you come towards ore and you get into this intermediate zone in the middle, it's not as simple, because when you look at this sample, it's also flagged as sodic alteration. And this is another albite that actually has hematite dusting over the top, which honestly doesn't look too different from this picture of potassic alteration. And this is also another sample from this intermediate zone, approximately 2 kilometres away. And this has been flagged in the geochemistry as potassic alteration, but it's also been flagged as potassic alteration that doesn't have the same typical signature as the Ernest Henry ore, which looks like this, which is straight from the guts of the drill hole EH435, and it has the typical breccia and potassic alteration. Another mineral that we've been focusing on with the work that we've been doing and also with codes has been looking at the garnets. So some of the previous work was focused within the intermediate zone and very close to the ore body, but we wanted to understand exactly what the garnets were doing in the system. As you can see, this is a picture of garnets. Here's some more as you get closer. This is approximately 2 kilometres in. The first image is more your regional typical garnets. And then in the middle is looking at your carbonate and garnet alteration. Oops. And this is also looking, you might have to squint a little bit, but I promise there's garnets in there, and this is within the ore. So some of the really neat things that we've been able to do is actually being able to differentiate between the garnets on a broad scale, even with the garnets being so fine in the high logger work. And this information has also been supported by further detailed work through TEMA and also the work that codes have been doing. So it's really neat to see that predominantly the alteration within the ore body and around the ore body is manganese rich, which isn't too unexpected. And I'll just leave you on this slide as I'm working on some of the new things that we've been discovering as we've been pulling apart the different mineral phases and the spectra in high logger, is that previously we thought that actinolite was part of you have the early sodic and then you have the sodic calcic alteration. It's thought of as a regional alteration that you see around the area, but actually it's not that simple. So this sample is in the middle of the project area, about 2 kilometres away from Ernest Henry. It's your typical actinolite. It's got some, it's overgrown and overprinting the early albite. Looks fine. This is a sample of actinolite, which is intergrown with chalcopyrite and is also overprinting K feldspar alteration. And this is from the bottom of the MMA 002 hole. And you're seeing this 4.5 kilometres away from the Ernest Henry ore body. So whether it's necessarily distinctive of Ernest Henry or whether it's another system or going towards something else, I'm not sure. But straight in the guts of Ernest Henry, this is a hole that's not shown on my diagram, but it's in the deeper parts of the ore body. And as you can see, it's just actinolite and chalcopyrite intergrown. So it's looking like actinolite is not just part of the early phase, but it's also having a bit related to the ore phase, which is interesting because previously when you see a lot of this alteration, you tendency just to think this is regional, this is unrelated to ore. But as we're finding out, there's a lot more phases, including like epidote, your garnets, your actinolites, and a whole bunch of other minerals that actually are occurring in multiple times, in multiple phases, and predominantly related to ore. So in conclusion, from bulk mineralogical and geochemical information, we're pretty sure that we can see the alteration signature at Ernest Henry, approximately 2 kilometres away. But there's really no standard individual technique that's able to recognise the distal alteration signatures. And this is why it's really important that the samples that we're collecting as part of our reference collection are the same samples that codes are working, are the same samples that SARA are working on, so that we can really build up a whole bunch of really useful information on the same physical samples. And I'm just going to comment on Vlad again, call out if anybody's interested in submitting samples or drill core to our collection. Feel free to come out of the blue. If you can't submit whole drill core, we're happy to have samples. We're able to high log holes. We're really happy in just opening up conversations and seeing what we can do. I feel like this is a really amazing start. We've currently put over 22 kilometres and increased the collections so far in Northwest Queensland tenfold. Thank you very much. And here's some acknowledgements. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to the Mineral Systems team, John Huntington, specifically to Glencore, who were just wonderful with letting us have access to their core and collect samples. Same with GBM Resources, and to everybody else who's been donating drill core. Thank you.
Thanks, Courtney. We have had a couple of questions while you and Vlad were talking. Vlad's already answered some of them online, but just for everybody's interest, I'll quickly talk through them. Richard Blewett from GA was asking Vlad while he was talking about was he including rock properties, and Vlad's reply was that that was part of the CSIRO component of the collaborative project. Richard also asked if we were looking undercover or if the geology maps that Vlad was showing were solid geology, and how much outcrop is there in the 6 by 6 kilometre area. There is no outcrop, it's all undercover. We've got a couple more questions. Yep. John Mavrogenis is saying, do you attribute the colour of the red albite and the red orthoclase to ferric iron, either substituting for alumina or hematite, or as hematite inclusions? Courtney?
Oh, I was going to flag this one to Vlad.
Okay, good. That's why it's it would have to go into detailed mineralogy, which is at the scale of team analysis. That's pretty much where we stopped at now.
All right. And Richard Blewett has said, I just wanted to know whether they are the same samples, and Vlad can answer, but they are, yes?
I would say predominantly in about 90% of all cases, they're exactly the same physical sample that have had parts sent off to different people for research or sent between groups to do the work.
All right. And then in the chats flow, Patrice DeCaratat said, great to see the CLR transform statistics when you were showing the geochemistry, Vlad. Marcus Tomkinson says, any comment on barium content of the feldspars as you approach the ore body?
Again, that's the realm of mineral chemistry, which internally we haven't touched.
But maybe Coach can answer next talk.
Well, yes, the next talk is going to go into mineral chemistry and barium generally increasing towards mineralization. There is no shortage of barite to many, many percents.
All right, well, maybe we can ask Sean to answer that one. And David Cook is saying it's hematite inclusions to John Mavrogenis for both. John's asking, is it both?